And with us now to talk more about this, Barbara McQuade, a former U.S. attorney who is now a law professor at the University of Michigan, and Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney who is a law professor at the University of Alabama and a newly minted senior fellow at New York University's Brennan Center for Justice. Barbara and Joyce are both MSNBC legal analysts. Also with us, MSNBC anchor Katy Tur, who was in the courtroom for yesterday's cross-examination. So, Katy, let me start with you. What was it like yesterday in there?
You know, I want to point out one thing that our colleague Laura Jarrett just had in that story she did for the Today Show this morning. That was that Mea Culpa podcast moment. And that was a really striking moment in the courtroom because up until then, the jury had just been hearing Michael Cohen's direct testimony. And I have to say, I mean, I know Michael Cohen really well. A lot of reporters do. I think anybody who watches television probably knows Michael Cohen well. He's got a very big personality. He's loud. He is can be abrasive. And inside the courtroom, he was very subdued. He was very calm, serene, almost had a hangdog quality to him. Maybe not serene, deflated is the way I would describe him, answering Todd Blanche's questions with yes, sir, no, sir, and that's correct for the most part. And then there was that moment where Todd Blanche and the defense played that podcast, that Mea Culpa podcast, and you heard Michael Cohen's voice yelling and saying how much he would love to see Donald Trump behind bars. And the contrast between Michael Cohen on the stand and that podcast was so striking that that was a moment that the jury really did react. Now, did they react because they don't believe Cohen, or did they react just because of the incredible difference between what he was like in testimony and what he's like on his podcast? That's unclear. For the most part, as I was watching the jury, and I had my eyes pretty heavily on them during much of the time that I was in the courtroom, they were paying attention. They were following Todd Blanche, going back and forth between him and Michael Cohen. They almost didn't look at Donald Trump whatsoever. I saw one or two glances toward Donald Trump as he was sitting on the defense at the defense table, but mostly they were paying attention closely to the testimony. Very stone-faced. You really couldn't read any reaction on their face. Besides that moment of the podcast, there was one other moment, and that was when Todd Blanche, right before lunch broke, when he got up there and he was building toward Michael Cohen having a faulty memory about an essential phone call that he says he had between Donald Trump in late October, where he told them that the Stormy Daniels matter was resolved. It was closed. He had dealt with it. He testified to this when the prosecution was on direct, and he was emphatic. He had no wavering whatsoever. Todd Blanche was able to point out that during the surrounding time of that phone call, he was having an issue with a 14-year-old boy who was harassing him, and he was sending text messages to Keith Schiller. And they tried to point out that Michael Cohen didn't actually remember the conversation that he had with Donald Trump because he didn't have a conversation with Donald Trump. He had a conversation with Keith Schiller. Schiller never passed the phone to Donald Trump, and the whole conversation was about this 14-year-old boy. And Cohen, on the witness stand, admitted that it could have been also about the 14-year-old boy, still said he believes he spoke with Donald Trump, but there was wavering in his memory there, and that was a moment as Todd Blanche raised his voice for the first time and said that was a lie, almost in a Hollywood depiction of a gotcha moment in court. That was when the jurors really reacted. I saw smiles on faces. I saw eyebrows raised. But again, what are they reacting to? Are they reacting to Todd Blanche suddenly raising his voice and getting theatrical, or are they reacting to Michael Cohen's wavering memory?
Yeah, and Joyce, one is struck by that this has become such a big issue. The case is not about Michael Cohen, although Michael Cohen plays a key part in it. What kind of impact do you think this 2016 October call could have on the entire case?
So this case is a lot easier for prosecutors to win if the jury believes Michael Cohen. And juries will, I think, accept allegations that witnesses have lied in the past, but that they've had a moment in their lives where they're now on a better track and they're committed to telling the jury the truth. If the defense version of this story holds that Michael Cohen lied to the jury about this call, the prosecution is in trouble. But there are a lot of other possible explanations here. Cohen gave a plausible one on the witness stand, saying, well, it's possible that I talked to Schiller first, but then he passed the phone to Trump. Prosecutors will do redirect to clean this up and clarify the situation. They'll very likely argue that if Cohen was making a story up, he would have just picked one of any number of phone calls he placed directly to Trump. There would have been no need to peg the story of this particular call to a phone call that was placed first to Keith Schiller, the bodyguard. So those sorts of arguments and those sorts of clarifications can come together to resurrect the credibility of a witness who stumbles on cross-examination.
So, Barbara, what is the responsibility of cleanup, right, for the prosecution on this specific issue? Because it seems as though Cohen is the only one so far we've been seeing on the stand that ties Donald Trump directly to knowledge, intent, and everything else on this.
Yeah, so I think the prosecution has to think about how to portray this. In many ways, this is, to me, is much ado about nothing. This is exactly what the prosecution expected would happen with a witness like Michael Cohen. It's likely the reason the feds walked away from it. Whenever you use a cooperator who has baggage, this is what cross-examination looks like. So there's no surprise here. But, you know, a jury who's never seen this before, maybe they fall for it when someone like Todd Blanche starts raising his voice and claiming that he's lying and all these kinds of things. But these are all the same tricks that you see all the time by defense attorneys. So if you're the prosecution, do you sort of validate this moment by trying to clean it up on redirect, or you just let it go and then in closing argument argue both of these things are completely plausibly true, right? He called him about the 14-year-old boy, and while he's there, he says, "Oh, you're with the boss? Put me on with him. Hey, boss, I took care of that thing." So the idea that somehow he's caught him in a lie strikes me as really rather ridiculous. But if the prosecution is concerned, they would raise this again. They would ask Michael Cohen. Now, they say that you were talking about a 14-year-old boy. Is that right? Yeah. And were you talking about anything else? Yes. We also talked, I informed Mr. Trump that the deal was taken care of. So I think this is something that they can address either in redirect or in closing. I think for people who've never seen this before, it seems like an exciting gotcha moment, maybe because the rest has been so dull. But to me, this is just the way defense attorneys sometimes try to make a mountain out of a molehill.
The fact that the call was 90 seconds long does, you know, there needs to be some explanation, right? That how something like that could happen in 90 seconds.
Hey, boss, it's taken care of. What did that take? 5 seconds?